Hi guys, it's me, Grandma Lily, and it is time for story time with Grandma Lily. So today is Tuesday. I hope you guys had a great day. I had a really nice day. It was very nice. It was a little chilly, but it was nice and sunny. Sunny days are my favorite. And I got to walk my dogs today. You know I love to walk my dogs. And so before we get started, I want to say hello to my babies, Jordan, Elijah, and Kylie. I love you and I miss you. And I can't wait to see you again. And Serenity, I love you and I miss you. And I can't wait to see you again either. So, remember yesterday, I started reading you a book called The Sign of the Seahorse, which was a tale of greed and high adventure in 2 acts. When we left our story at the end of Act 1, Pearl Trout and her father, Mr. Trout, along with all their friends, were off looking for a new reef to live in because they had to leave their old reef because of the poison that made all the seahorses go away and the fact that Grootmund P. Grouper, our villain, had taken over the Trout Cafe. So, we now remember Pearl and Bert, who was part of the army, they had fallen in love, and Bert had sent Pearl a message that Pearl's brother Phineas brought to her when he was with the Catfish Gang, and she is now sending him messages by carving seahorse signs wherever she is to show her path. Kind of like the way Hansel and Gretel left breadcrumbs, if you ever read that story. Okay, so we're going to go with Act 2. Act 2, The Deep. And this is The Sign of the Seahorse by Graeme, in which Pearl and her companions journey through the ocean depths and outsmart a hungry moray eel. Ooh. The sea snails, Pearl and Mr. Trout, were far away from home, in strange, uncharted waters where no reef folk ever roam. Around them towered murky shapes of rocks and cliffs unseen, the grim, forbidding shadows of a deep and dark ravine. The little band of travelers pressed onward through the deep, past fearsome black anemones and fish that never sleep. And as they journeyed bravely through this bleak and dismal vale, Pearl carved her little seahorse signs to mark the party's trail. They came across a fallen rock that blocked the path ahead and forced the group to take a less inviting route instead. Pearl stopped to leave a seahorse sign, but as she drew her knife, the rock that Pearl was resting on came suddenly to life. It reared up high above her head, a writhing snake-like figure that looked like some enormous slug, except with teeth and bigger. Pearl dropped the knife, and leaping back, she gave a little squeal, for rearing high above her was a great big moray eel. "My dear," he said in dulcet tones, "I really must protest. You very nearly ruined my expensive satin vest. And this one is my favorite, so elegant yet plain. I think I'll have to eat you, so it won't occur again." It's kind of scary. I don't want an eel to eat me. He smiled at Pearl, a hungry gleam reflecting in his eye. But Pearl had kept her senses, and she told a desperate lie. "How lovely!" she exclaimed aloud. "An eel has come to dine. My friend the killer whale will be along to chill the wine." "A killer whale?" the eel inquired. "My dear, I think you jest. And little fish who tell white lies are something I detest." But suddenly a roar rang out from somewhere up on high that sounded very much as though a killer whale was nigh. The moray eel was most impressed and quickly changed his style from ruthless deep-sea predator to service with a smile. "Perhaps I can assist you, ma'am? It seems you need a hand. I know these parts extremely well. Your wish is my command." That mighty roar was not, in fact, a bona fide whale, but just a quick impression by our friend, the little snail. He'd grabbed a giant trumpet shell and given all he'd got, a trick that every sea snail knew, but eels, it seems, did not. The moray eel was anxious now to make the whale his friend, for fear his life might soon come to a most unpleasant end. And so he told Pearl all about the valleys and its traps, and how to find the secret ways through fissures, cracks, and gaps. He told her how a spreading plague had recently arrived and killed off all the seaweed. Very little had survived. It came from over yonder, and he pointed up ahead, along the very path her little group had planned to tread. If paradise is what you seek, your road lies to the west, for there you'll find a reef to more than satisfy your quest. This valley leads to nothing more than darkness and despair. Climb up across the mountains, for the land you seek lies there. Pearl thanked the eel and took her leave, albeit with some care, and joined her hidden comrades and the whale that wasn't there. Then, taking heed of all they'd heard and what they hoped to find, they started on the long, slow climb and left the deep behind. Huge eel there. Look at that guy. Scene 2, the source of the poison, in which the soldier crabs reach the end of their search. Bert makes a shocking discovery, and Phineas reveals the grouper's treachery. That night, as Pearl began to climb the mountains of the deep, her true love Bert was woken from a restless, troubled sleep. He fancied that he heard a cry come drifting on the tide, and pulling on 4 pairs of boots, he took a look outside. The soldier crabs were camped upon a plain of withered stumps, once splendid coral sculptures, now just sticky, oily lumps. For days the crabs had marched across this grim, polluted land, and Bert could tell the poison source was very close at hand. He peered into the murky gloom and listened for the sound, and faintly heard the cry again. His heart began to pound. It came from somewhere up ahead, not far from where he stood. So Bert went to investigate, as all good soldiers should. A rocky outcrop barred his way, demanding that he climb through sickly streams of oily gunk and gobs of horrid slime. He reached the crest and cried out with amazement and surprise, for nothing could have steeled him for the sight that met his eyes. Uh-oh. What is Bert gonna find? Let's see. A dozen massive canisters lay scattered on the ground, embedded in the blackened sand, with debris all around. And from a drum that lay atop the huge corroded heap, he watched a stream of reeking, oily liquid slowly seep. With horrid fascination, Bert observed the poison flow across the rocky landscape to the spreading plain below. A figure lay upon the rocks, a spiky yellow mane. "It's Phineas!" Bert's urgent cry rang out across the plain. He scrambled down into the slime and waded to his friend, who raised his head and pointed to the leaking barrel's end. A tap, protruding from the drum, spewed forth the evil brew. And using his enormous brain, Bert knew just what to do. He grabbed the tap and turned it off, but still the liquid flowed. The toxic waste had caused the rubber washers to corrode. Then, in a feat of wondrous strength, Bert raised his mighty claw and squeezed the rusty faucet till the poison flowed no more. Bert's cry awoke the other crabs, who scuttled up the hill and gathered round poor Finny, who was very gravely ill. In fits and gasps he told them of the grouper's shocking crime, and how he tried to turn the tap and stop the deadly slime. "My catfish friends were captured by the grouper's evil louts, but I escaped and hunted for the army's whereabouts. I came across the poison, and I tried to turn it off. His tale of woe was halted by an awful, racking cough. The soldier crab commander issued orders left and right. 'Take down the tents, make fast the guns, we head for home tonight.' The enemy is elsewhere, though his crime is all around. Leave not a stone or rock unturned. This grouper must be found. They're ready to go. I hope they can help Phineas. Scene 3, the discovery of paradise, in which Pearl and her fellow travelers reach the end of their climb and make a wonderful discovery. For 40 long, exhausting days and 40 sleepless nights, Pearl's little band climbed wearily to vast and giddy heights, where plankton swirled in drifting waves of phosphorescent snow. The sea snails plodded onwards through the strange, translucent glow. They came across a meadow ringed by weird, exotic trees, where giant clumps of seaweed swayed upon the ocean breeze. But ever upwards led the trail. They tarried but a day. Pearl carved her secret sign, and they continued on their way. Eventually there came a day they climbed the final crest and gazed across a mighty plain that rolled into the west. They'd reached the furthest threshold of the continental shelf, and to their weary eyes it looked like paradise itself. The ocean gleamed and sparkled in the early morning light, a grand, dramatic backdrop to a truly stirring sight. For there, beneath a gleaming veil of slanting golden rays, a coral reef of untold size lay glowing in the haze. And as they watched, it seemed to them the ocean rose and fell with countless tiny jewels that danced and flickered in the swell. Pearl's eyes were filled with tears of joy. No further would they roam. A million swirling seahorses had come to guide them home. Look how beautiful. Isn't that beautiful? Scene 4, the end of the grouper, in which the catfish are rescued, the grouper is vanquished, and Finny remembers something of great importance. Behind the grouper's hideout, in a dank and smelly shed, the catfish gang lay bound and gagged, unhappy and unfed. A week had passed, and still no sign that help was on its way. The gang's despondent mood increased with every passing day. Then suddenly there came a mighty blow upon the door, and through the splintered timbers crashed a massive orange claw. It smashed the door to smithereens, then disappeared from sight, and left the catfish speechless with astonishment and fright. The claw belonged to Combat Lobster 46903, the flagship of the Soldier Crab's crustacean cavalry. The army had arrived at last, and leading the attack was long-lost comrade Phineas, astride the lobster's back. The captive catfish clapped and cheered and danced in leaps and bounds, which, seeing they were bound and gagged, was harder than it sounds. But then as Finny freed his friends, they heard an angry shout. The grouper's thugs had heard the noise and come to check it out. The sharks converged on 903, who raised his giant claw and furnished Stan an uppercut beneath his greasy jaw. The startled sharks turned tail and fled, the catfish giving chase, but found themselves surrounded, fin to fin and face to face. A cornered shark is dangerous, as any catfish knows, and Finny quickly realized this scene could come to blows. But just in time, the soldier crabs arrived to save the day. They apprehended Stan and Ted and marched them both away. Yay for the soldier crabs! Yay for Bert! Yay for Phineas! Yay! The shark's arrest was carried out according to the book. A routine operation, how to bag a petty crook. But capturing the swordfish and his evil grouper boss was proving somewhat harder, and the crabs were at a loss. "Come out and keep your fins held high," the crab commander cried. "We've got the place surrounded, and we know that you're inside." But silence greeted every word the colonel had to say. Could Gropmund and his right-hand fish have somehow got away? Then with a roar, the swordfish burst upon the startled crabs and fiercely waved his sword about, with wicked sweeps and jabs. He lunged towards the colonel, dragged him roughly off his steed, then bit him on the ankle, which was very fierce indeed. But Finney grabbed a lobster pot and rode into the fray, and holding it above his head, he shouted, "Bombs away!" He trapped the swordfish, sword and all, from snout to thrashing tail, a neatly packaged villain in a private one-fish jail. The grouper watched the swordfish fall and knew his race was run. Then quoth aloud his golden rule, "Look out for number one." He grabbed a sack of unmarked pearls and quickly slipped inside. But waiting there was Corporal Bert. "You're through," the corporal cried. He grabbed the squirming grouper in his strong crustacean claws and carried him aloft amid tumultuous applause. And so the mighty grouper fell, a sorry sight indeed, bereft of any dignity, a victim of his greed. And there you have it. But we still have more story, don't we? The grouper's reign had ended, but his legacy remained. They gazed across a barren land, a seascape cracked and stained. The army had prevailed and brought the villains to be tried. But where were they to go now that their coral reef had died? Then Finney gave a sudden cry, Pearl's parting note to Bert. He'd totally forgotten it, tucked deep inside his shirt. He drew it out, all stained and torn, but more or less complete, and handed it to Bert, who read the precious crumpled sheet. "My darling Bert, I write this with a sad and heavy heart. For long and hard will be the days that we must be apart. But every turn my journey takes, a sign will mark the way for you to find and follow till we meet again one day." And so it was. They learned about the trail Pearl left behind and followed in her footsteps, knowing not what they would find. In time they reached the promised land and soon forgot their pain. But nothing ever grew upon that coral reef again. Epilogue. That was the end of Act 2, guys. So that's the end, but there's an epilogue, and that means we get to find out what happens next, in which the new Seahorse Cafe is opened, and we learn the fate of the grouper and his partners in crime. The captain was a splendid sight, white glove and crimson vest. A shiny golden medal gleamed brightly on his chest. The medal read for courage, and he glanced at it with pride, then squared his jaw, breathed deeply, checked his tie, and stepped inside. The cafe was a sea of fish, all dressed up to the nines, a teeming mass of fins and slippers, earrings, spikes, and spines. As Bert stood gazing round the room, Pearl winked at him and smiled, and served another customer a mug of mollusk mild. Then Phineas called out his name. "Come sit with us, my friend, and let us toast the hero of the grouper's dismal end." The catfish gang all stood and clapped. Captain Bert went red. "I only did my duty," the embarrassed soldier said. Young Finney had a medal too, a purple heart and rose, that hung in pride of place upon his bruised and bandaged nose. In grateful recognition of a brave and wounded trout, that glorious inscription dangled proudly from his snout. Look at that. Aren't we proud of them for saving us all? The brand new Seahorse Cafe had been open just a week, but in that time, the patronage had reached an all-time peak. The techno-laser dance floor was awash with stomping feet as Kevin and the Kippers played their famous Reef Town beat. A backing group of angelfish accompanied the band with perfect three-part harmonies, the finest in the land. Since parting from the grouper, they had polished up their act, and now they filled the dance floor with the crowds they could attract. The grouper sharks were still around, a little short of friends, but to their credit, both of them had tried to make amends. They worked the late night roster, doing small domestic chores, collecting dirty glasses, washing walls, and scrubbing floors. Their former chief, the swordfish, had a blossoming career that utilized his swordmanship, at which he had no peer. He peeled a mean potato, over 80 bags a week, the fruit of hours of practice and a fabulous technique. And as for Grutman Grouper, undisputed king of crime, he groveled at the kitchen sink, his flippers in the grime. Beneath a pile of filthy plates, at last he understood that greed brought only ruin, and the tide had turned for good. Oops. And so, guys, the end. And there you see Grotman washing dishes. And what did we learn, guys, about that story? So you know, that story started because all the seahorses disappeared because there was oily, yucky stuff in the water. And it was poison. And it killed everything in the water. And that's what happens. It even killed the coral reef. And if you saw at the end of the story, nothing ever grew there again. So we have to be very careful what kind of garbage we put in our water. The other thing we learned is that when you're greedy, it never works out. So, just as I promised, tomorrow we are going to have a very, very, very special Dr. Seuss story for a very, very special person who's having a birthday. So, we will say happy birthday tomorrow to that very special person. In the meantime, Grandma Lily loves you. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.